We'd like to welcome you to today's edition of You Can Farm Talks. As always, we like to give a quick introduction to the program as we kick off our show. You Can Farm Talks is a live video podcast series where we talk with people in the agriculture industry who can share important and relevant information and insights for new and beginning farmers and ranchers. We try to keep these episodes pretty short and focused. They generally last about 20 to 30 minutes. We begin by asking our guests to share their story in agriculture, and then we ask them to talk about one thing that they think someone getting started in agriculture needs to know. So if you're tuning into our live Zoom feed, we hope that you'll submit questions for our guests in the chat window. When we get to the end, I'll choose a question or two to ask the guest. All of these shows are recorded and posted online on our webpage. There's also an online discussion forum where you can engage with us, and we'll respond to additional questions that we don't get to during the live episode. So with all of that said, I'm going to move on, and I'm very pleased to introduce our guest today, Cindy Garretson-Weibel. Let's start with a little background about Cindy. She's been involved in Wyoming agriculture in a lot of different ways, beginning with growing up on a ranch near Saratoga. Then she went on to get her degree in agricultural communications from the University of Wyoming and continued into a career that included many leadership roles and becoming an advocate for Wyoming agriculture. Here are some of the roles and descriptions that Cindy has had throughout her career. She's been director of the Wyoming LEAD, L-E-A-D, Adult Agricultural Development Program for 25 years, facilitates intense leadership training, received international recognition for that work. She served as Ag Marketing Director for the state of Wyoming for 11 years. She's a former president of the North American Ag Marketing Officials. She was a Wyoming representative at National Association of Rural Rehabilitation Programs. She was a board member for Wyoming Rural Development and Council for over 10 years. She's currently Community Navigator Program Coordinator for the UW Extension, and she's coordinating currently a development of an online resource tool for rural entrepreneurs. And earlier in her career, she served as executive director for the Wyoming Stock Growers and editor of Cow Country magazine for 13 years. Cindy was a 4-H leader for more than 15 years. She's been active and she served on advisory boards for a number of organizations, including she's on the advisory board for Sustainable Ag Research and Extension Center. She sits on the board for the Wyoming Women's Business Center, which operates a microloan program and assists underserved populations with business development needs. She was recently appointed to the Wyoming Farm Service State Committee. And in 2015, she started Leading Edge Consulting, which is her own business to provide marketing and business development assistance for agricultural producers and small businesses, while she's continuing to develop leaders in the agriculture industry. Cindy, welcome to You Can Farm Talks. I'm really glad that you could join us tonight.
It's nice to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for being here. If I added up all the years of service in the various organizations you've been involved in, it spanned more than one lifetime. So clearly you've kept yourself extremely busy. You've juggled a lot of different obligations at the same time over the years. So, I'm really excited to hear. We always like to start off by hearing what's your own story from our guests about their own story in agriculture. And I've rattled off a lot of the things you've been involved in, but I'm hoping that now maybe you can, help us put it all together and tell us about what drove you, through your journey. What made you choose that path and, some of the challenges you faced along the way. So tell us a little bit more about you, Cindy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate this opportunity. I grew up on a ranch over by Saratoga, Wyoming, and that was a great opportunity to fall in love with agriculture. Then after I graduated from high school, ended up in Laramie at the University of Wyoming, and as you mentioned, got a degree in agricultural communications. So it's probably not surprising that we'll talk a little bit more about communications later in the program.
Yeah.
And then honestly, I found I've had my dream job several times in the state of Wyoming, going to work for the Wyoming Stock Growers, basically putting their publication together and getting involved in that. And then having an opportunity to go on as the director and then another dream job being the marketing director for the state of Wyoming. So through all of that, I think what has driven me is my passion for agriculture and really being on the service side of agriculture, not having the opportunity to go back to a farm and ranch of my own,
Right.
but wanting to see others succeed in agriculture in the state of Wyoming. So that's all the things that I've done really have been with that end goal in mind, to keep other people in agriculture.
Wow. Yeah, you've done some exciting things. You really have had some dream jobs. I mean, those are pretty exciting roles that you've filled, and some things that you've done along the way. So it's exciting. And I think from that you bring a tremendous amount of perspective, especially for the type of audience and the type of group that we're addressing with this program, in trying to help people learn about how to get going, how to get started, how to succeed in agriculture. So yeah, that's wonderful. As you know, and as we've talked about, so I guess we can move on to the main purpose. The big purpose of this podcast is to share something that we call our guests one thing. Truth be known, I got that, what came into my mind because of the if you ever heard Jack Palance and City Slickers, it's just one thing, right? What's the most important thing in life? It's just one thing, right? So something that you think new and beginning farmers should know, or maybe keep in mind, be thinking about, be doing, those kinds of things. So you've got a lot of experience in particular with agricultural businesses and entrepreneurs. You've probably seen a lot of examples of what it takes to make those people and those businesses successful, and probably what causes them not to be successful. So Cindy, tell us about your one thing and what you think that our new and beginning farmers need to know.
All right. Well, my one thing is for everyone to take time to communicate with everyone involved in the operation. And I'd even go a step further, everyone affected by the operation.
Ooh.
So it seems like it would be fairly obvious that communication is important, but it is amazing to me when I visit with producers on farming and ranching operations, how many times that the barrier to an effective business is often the lack of communication. So I think that it really is important to have great communication up front, not only between the boss and the employees, the parents and the children. Oftentimes mom and dad are in their 70s and they're not even talking about what's going to happen to the place when they move on. And then that next generation, they aren't very good at communicating either, because they haven't had anyone demonstrate good communication skills.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Husband and wives, it's important to both be on the same page and understand what the common goal is. So I just think that communication is extremely important in these farming and ranching operations, and in any business, it's important. So that's my one thing, is taking time to communicate.
Sure. Well, I think that touches on, and what you just mentioned touches on several aspects that affect new and beginning farmers. I mean, you talked about things that affect transition planning, that affect ongoing operations and all the things getting started. What would you say are some of the most important? How does somebody approach that if they, as you mentioned, a lot of people coming from, whether it's rural backgrounds, agricultural background, maybe it's the West. I know that sometimes just communication isn't always, just do your job, get your work done. That's the important thing. How do you become better at those kinds of things?
Well, it takes practice. And so you can start with your significant other. That's a good way to start with your kids. So in order to communicate effectively, we also have to be good listeners. So the communication is a process. There's a sender that has a message, and then there's the message itself. So we have to be clear that we're giving a good message, clear and concise. And then when we transmit the message, we also have to make sure that that's done properly, whether that's through an email or verbally, whatever the method is. And honestly, I think that's one of the challenges that we have today. It's really easy to send a text message and assume that somebody on the other end understands what we're talking about. So the receiver is the fourth important person in this whole communication cycle. They have to be a willing recipient and then really understand what the message that the original sender gave and provide feedback. So, there's a whole cycle in the communication feedback loop, and an opportunity for that to break down at any point. So I think that it's really important that that everyone that's involved in the communication provides feedback, and we really make sure that the message is understood.
Yeah. Well, that's some really great points. And I think, and we also all, it seems to me, what occurred to me as you were talking about that is different generational issues too. And you talk about, for example, text communications. Well, you're probably texting now with someone who may have, grown up with, with a rotary dial phone and have a different perspective. So when you talk about senders and receivers, how do you figure out how that's going to be when people come at it from such different perspectives when it comes to, say, maybe technology, which is, as you mentioned, is maybe the most common form and often cases of how we might communicate.
Right. Yeah. Again, I think that that's why you have to make sure that that the communication isn't just through a text message, that there's follow-up. I think that's really important, that that you have a chance to provide feedback. And then one of the most important things about communication is listening. There's a reason that we have two ears and one mouth. It's because we need to listen more than we talk.
Right. Right. No, that's absolutely true. Well, it's a great lesson for people. What are some of the things, are there resources available that people could access if they want to get better at this? Let's say somebody recognizes, gosh, I'm not a great communicator. I struggle with this. Maybe they see the evidence of it. So what are some of the resources and what are some of the things they could do to get better?
Absolutely. There are a lot of online resources, but I think also the University of Wyoming provides communication opportunities, the community colleges, any local area. I think you can find courses on communication. And then the University of Wyoming, through the Community Navigator program, we're actually working on some communication resources as well. So I think that can be valuable. So there is a lot of information out there. And I like to point people to their local people first, because I like that, again, the local communication, instead of just Googling something, having that actual feedback. And I'd be happy to provide a whole list of resources for anyone who's interested.
Oh, that'd be great. I hopefully, and we'll post, if you can send us, we'll put those up on our page and make sure that those are out there and available to everyone to learn a little bit more, because I think it's going to be, people are going to wonder, when you really think about it, communicating something we do every day, but when we really think about it, sometimes we realize our failings on things that we don't think about. Now let's say you are in a situation and you're running maybe an operation, and the future of your operation really depends on that communication. And let's say there is a major breakdown. I mean, maybe it's not just as simple as I'm just having trouble being understood, but maybe it's a difficulty in some other kind of a problem. What are some of the other options that might be available? I mean, for example, do you recommend, should a third party get involved? What happens if you have some sort of a difficulty in that way? Are there other options we should think about?
There definitely are options. There's a great mediation program in the state of Wyoming that's offered as a resource. And so if communication really does break down to that point, I think that's a really good tool. What I hope to convey this evening is that you really need to have these discussions early on in the business to prevent some of these communications from breaking down. I have seen in a lot of businesses where not everybody has the same vision for where the farmer ranch is headed, whether that's the parents and the kids, or the spouse and the husband. And if they're not understanding what the common goal is and in agreement, then that's not setting that business up for much success. So I think having those open and honest discussions up front, they are not comfortable discussions sometimes. Like when you ask, there's maybe two children in a ranching operation, and they both want the ranch, but it's not big enough for both of them. Those are some really uncomfortable
Mhm.
discussions, but they need to happen as soon as possible, so everyone can be on the same page.
So how do you, and I've seen that and I've been aware of situations like that. How do you set those things up? And I think that the advice is very important to start that early. How do you set that up for success? Let's say you realize that this is an uncomfortable thing. Everybody wants to avoid it. Nobody wants to address this issue, right? How do you do you have any recommendations for people that are trying to set that up for success? And say, okay, how would I create an environment where maybe, although nobody wants to talk about this, we all somehow can?
Yeah, I think that one of the easiest ways to set that up for success is to bring someone from the outside in as a facilitator of sorts to actually
Hmm.
have the discussion, whether it's a goal setting session with individuals, and then that puts the burden on that individual for a successful meeting, and they're a neutral party. So I
Yeah.
think that that can really help a lot as people are identifying what it is they want to do with their future in agriculture.
Yeah. Where would they find, will they, some of the resources that you mentioned, was that where they would might be able to find somebody who could serve that role and could do that for a family or could help a family with that way?
Absolutely, and don't forget about your local county
Mm.
extension
Yep.
personnel. You know, they're in touch with those skills and know other people as well. But yeah, I will definitely put that in my resource list that I
Yeah.
provide.
No, that's great. That's great. Another aspect of communication, and I think, touches on, the rather than, in addition to all the family and those communication issues, I guess things like marketing your product. There are a lot of other ways that maybe communicating with the outside world might become important as well. And again, you're having to go out there and do that in a lot of different ways, sometimes using some technology, sometimes using things like social media. So that might be another way. If we, how do you have any advice for people when they're looking at that aspect of their communication skills?
Yeah, one thing that I really encourage in businesses to do is to look at everyone that has some skills. You know,
Hmm.
so say it's a couple in their 40s starting a ranching operation. Take a look at, if you're not an expert in social media or web design, but you have a son or daughter or something like that, nephew who is
Yeah.
really good at that, don't forget to use those individuals as resources. Or the other thing, don't be afraid to hire something that you don't have the skill in. Don't be afraid to hire that out. Get
Mm.
somebody who is a professional. I learned this when I started my own business. I was doing some of the things that I wasn't as good at. And so then I hired somebody to do those things. And in the long run, it saved me money and time. Then I wasn't struggling trying to learn a new skill.
Yeah.
And another area, in addition to the marketing, is the financial side of the business.
Right.
If there is somebody that you know of, either it could be in the operation or an employee that is skilled in bookkeeping and finances, and they're interested in doing that, by all means, I encourage people to work with their strengths and identify who best fits that.
Yeah. Yeah, there very likely will be people in a family operation, different generations. Again, it can be a strength. You can use it as, rather than just being a difficulty in the communications. It can clearly, as you mentioned, be a strength. And social media, I think that the younger generation is probably more likely to be well versed in that than than the older, and that's a way for probably everybody to get involved. So that's really, that's very good advice as well.
Right.
Um, so another area, how about communicating with other people in your industry? So, I would call it, say, networking and getting involved in the industry and organizations. how do we learn how to do that? You know, how to sometimes, and again, various people have different levels of comfort, but I think that's probably still important, getting to know other people in your industry and being involved. Do you have any recommendations along those lines?
Yeah, go to things, show up when they have things in person. I think it's important. You know, we've gotten where we're used to doing things virtually, which is great. It's effective, it's efficient use of time. But there are really times and opportunities that having a face-to-face discussion with someone is
Mm,
so valuable. So I encourage people to pick a few organizations at the local level. Start with the local level so you don't have to travel as far, and get involved and visit with other people who are experts or even just starting out. You can learn so much more from one another than you can from industry experts. I think those who have actually been in the trenches and done the work, they have a lot of good advice. And the thing that I love about the West is that people are willing to share their successes as well as the things that they've done wrong when they're trying to help beginning farmers and ranchers. And I've very seldom had anyone who wasn't willing to share their story and help a new person out. So I think that that's a tremendous asset that we have.
yeah, well, that's a great, that's, you know, that's encouraging. And I think it's probably, if that's an impediment for somebody who is a new and beginning farmer rancher, I think there's probably a little bit, and I, you know, at times trepidation in doing that, and realizing that other people are willing to share even when they weren't always successful is probably important. You know, I always say, you know, sometimes it's important to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And I think in some of that communication, you learn to get better at it by doing it, and maybe not always doing it as well as as you hoped, but you know, moving into that next phase, right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, no, that's wonderful stuff. What else have we missed on the communication? I mean, those have been some things that jumped out at me in some aspects, but communication is one of those that's so essential to everything we do that it seems like there are probably some other things that I might not have thought about. So what are some other things we missed?
So don't forget to communicate not only with your neighbors, you know, if you're going to be doing some fencing or whatever it may be, let your neighbors know what you're doing. Or if you're going to be starting, for instance, I've worked with people who were going to add a hunting component to the farm and ranching operation. And so they were bringing in hunters. And in these small communities, uh, it's nice if you give the townspeople a heads up. So maybe if there's a Western store in town, you can give them a heads up and say, hey, these people are coming in. They aren't going to get in till 7 o'clock. I know they're going to want to come shopping. Will you extend your hours? If you just kind of let the community know what's going on, instead of them guessing what all these strangers are doing in town, you're actually being proactive and again setting the business up for success, I think.
Yeah, oh, that makes a lot of sense. As you say, people, when they're communicated with and when they hear it from someone, they're probably going to take it a lot better than being surprised.
Exactly.
No, that's great advice, and I think there's a lot that people can take from that. And you work with, you know, what you work, is this some of the things that you work with when you work with you know, businesses, individuals, some of these organizations you've been involved with facilitate this, you know, in addition to their local resources, there are a lot of different places they can turn, I believe.
Yes, yes. In fact, that's kind of why I started my own business, because I was giving all my best advice away all these years, and I had so many ideas I wanted to do on my own. It was really an exciting opportunity, and
Yeah.
so I really enjoy helping people be successful, and the communication is an area that I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think, you know, it's one of those things that seems simple because we always do it, but we don't always do it well. And I really appreciate your coming on to highlight that for us and to give us some really good ideas of how people can improve on that And, I'd like to, hopefully we can add information on how to get a hold of you, some of the resources. And, if anybody wants to reach out and has questions, they can, then wants to take things to the next level, they know where to go to do that. So I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us and to do that. So thank you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And one of my mentors is John Maxwell. He's a leadership guru, and he has a great book that's called Everyone Communicates, but Few Connect. So I think it's important that we make the connections in order to better communicate.
Wonderful. Well, I might be able to get a link up to that as well. So yeah. That's great. This is good stuff, and it's going to be really helpful. So thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate you guys doing this. Thank
you. And so as we always kind of wrap up, we got just a few little things. So we appreciate, all of this. That's it for this episode tonight. But thanks to you for those of you who took the time to join this live discussion, submit the questions, kind of work those in as we went. The recording will be posted and archived on our website and on our YouTube page. If you have any more questions, or if you're watching the recorded episode right now and didn't get a chance to ask them, please feel free to send questions via email, or even better, go to the forum on our discussion forum on our webpage and put them there. We'll try to respond to as many of them as we can. And you'll also be able to go there and find some of these resources. So stay tuned. We'll have more information again about when we can tune into the next You Can Farm Talks organization. And also follow our Facebook page. Funding for this program has been provided by the USDA NIFA BFRDP program. We'd also like to thank Custom Ag Solutions, Right Risk, and especially our partners at University of Wyoming Extension. Thank you very much for listening to You Can Farm Talks.